Hey, good morning, my friend. This is Shippy the Explorer coming to you with another video of experience and culture and stories, and hopefully you're enjoying them or learning from these type of videos, and and hopefully I'm doing these things so because sometimes I think I'm placed on this earth to tell people of the olden days of how things used to go. So welcome to this medium, and Shippy the Explorer is saying, I hope you're not scared of what I'm saying and not boring you, but you're being entertained as we go along. Well, back to the old thing is that outside is cold, and I've veered away from some of just walking around and show you the flowers, because some of them are gone because they've melted with the ice, well, with the cold, and some of the plants have died down since in overnight. So I thought of bringing some of these old time stories and old time talk about the whole cultural days, especially in Jamaica and the Caribbean and any areas that dealt with colonization and mixture with slavery and indigenous people. Um, their way of life was set back then. Say 100, I would say 100 years ago, 125 years ago. This was the setting back then. So I'm trying to just tell you some of these stories. Today we're embarking on the fact that we say golden days, golden days were golden. So Shipping the Explorer is continuing with these olden tapes, the videos, and situational life, the whole country, especially in Jamaica. So you can't talk about life unless you can't talk about life unless you expect death, and they go hand in hand. So, but some people probably think I'm maybe morbid and don't want to talk about this, but this is just to show you I'm discussing this because I'm trying to compare what is happening now, especially in Jamaica, and in the olden days. So the olden days of what occurs with death in the family. In say 19, even 1960. Let's take it at that, as 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 early as that. But I'm going to talk about one family member. She passed. She was a vibrant person in the family, um, in her days, really industrious. She married a somewhat wealthy person, and she was industrious and a trader, and go to the market and buy and sell her goods. And she got rich, and she built her lovely house with the front porch and the lattice on in the front. And then her husband passed, and then she somehow got sick, and Miss Darkus, I use her name. And so now we're looking at Miss Darkus as somebody who doesn't have anything. As kids, we were wondering, is she a mad woman or mentally disturbed and all and that? So this our her sister would send us with food and water and sustenance on a daily basis to give to Miss Darkus, and so it continues like that day after day. But every so often she would flare up, and she would be cursing everybody in the neighborhood. But time approached when she got sick, and that's the main thing that I'm going to talk about, because I'm going to use her death as what it used to be. And Miss Darkus died, man, and we were somewhat sad. Actually, one of us would carry the food that day, and we found her unresponsive. And little we'd know, by the time we probably call somebody else, they identify her as passed. So preparation starts for a once a bright, vibrant person, and Miss Darkus was kept at home, and for 3 days. For 3 days, right away, the funeral planning kicked in, and somehow somebody must have been called to look and find her best clothes that she could be buried in. The carpenters came around, and they gathered and they started to make the wooden coffin out of the old cedar board that was left lying or leaned up under the, or left stashed under the cellar. And as the coffin was being made, and the busyness of the yard, Miss Darkus' body was laid out in the middle of the living room in the hall and covered up. And then I understand then there's a special embalming lady who came, and we understand she brought her coffee and her spices and her rum. And what they used to do is they seal the excrement, the extreme cavities of the body, the rectum and the nostril, and so forth, with rum and coffee and other spices that wasn't told to us. And then Miss Darkus was laid out in the room. And then by the third day, then we wait on the evening of the third day, when we call it the people came from all over the place now, and this was the night of the setup. Now you're setting up with the family, and this was set up. Nowadays they're calling set up or 9-night, and they're mixing up the whole thing in Jamaica. Well, I'm here to straighten you out. Setup was the night before the burial, and the day before the burial, the coffin, the grave was being dug, and then in the yard we had cooking taking place, and then you didn't have to spend a lot of money for the family, because all the friends and friends of the family would be bringing the food stuff. Somebody would bring a bunch of bananas, somebody would bring some flour, somebody would bring some saltfish, somebody would bring some mackerel, and somebody would bring water and flour. And it's a gathering and a community collection of food. And then during the digging of the grave, people would be working and digging the grave, but food would be prepared. And in the night, then you have these people who gather around the body on the table, maybe one or two or three, and they would sit down and they prayed. They stayed quiet while Miss Darkus was on the table, laid out in state, covered up. And then, so what happening now is that's the night of the setup. And then in certain parts of the evening, a certain maybe 9 or 8 or 9 o'clock, the singing would start. And then the guys would, the day before that, there would be a bamboo booth built. There was a bamboo booth built out in the yard. And the night of the setup was when they would lay a table in the middle of the hall, and have bamboo benches, and the singing and the dancing would start. And on the table there was water and rum and salt. And then there was a special song leader with his whole song, Bible song books. And then the singing would start and the dancing would start. And this was a set-up night. And people would sing and pray and dance and all night. And 12 o'clock, about 12 or so, or 1 o'clock in the morning, the people who were in the kitchen cooking or boiling the coffee tea and the chocolate tea and frying the sprat, this was ready with a slice of bread. And then the people who have gathered, they would be eating. Some would be still singing and some were dancing, but the food was being distributed. And the next morning, the next day, that night, I don't know if it was a night, but early in the morning, I suspect Miss Darkus was laid in the newly made cedar coffin and sealed. And then by 10 o'clock that day, 11 o'clock that morning, she was taken out of the house and taken out to the grave, and the minister was there, and the preaching and the crying and the praying started and lasted for maybe an hour. And then she was lowered into the grave with the help of one man or two men. I think it was two. But they would tie a rope around the coffin and they would gradually lay her coffin down in the grave onto two stones, one at the head and one at the foot. And I'll tell you about the graves back then. The graves were oriented between east and west. And when you lay the person down in the coffin, the head was supposed to turn towards the east. And in the grave, the coffin was placed like that. And then, after the minister did his words of institution and his praying and all that, then the singing start, where we entombed or covered the coffin with dirt. And then the men and the women, mainly the women, they gather their shovel and they would sing and they throw the dirt. After the minister would say, take a handful of it and say, ashes to ashes and dust to dust. And that would be thrown on the coffin first. And then the throwing of shovelful of earth would gradually be taken and cover the grave until we reach a molding mount of a body elongated mountain, small elongated mountain that's oriented between east and west, with her head at the head of the grave. There would be a cross place, and on the grave there would be placed maybe roses, and the singing and the crying and everything continued from Miss Darky. And that we buried her in some resolution that we had done wonders for her, and now she's gone. Some sadness, but we have a thing called 9 night, and 9 days and 9 nights after that funeral, we had another singing and dancing, and that was the 9th night of after death, or somewhere around there. But the singing and dancing start, and in the same booth we had the singers with their and some of the guys who could read the Bible, and they would be reading the passage of the Bible, and they would be singing. And then there were the person who leads the singing, they would bring back those old songs. And some people would be dancing and the singing, and the voices raised up into the woods and the hinterlands of the mountainside. And they do that all night, all evening and night. And then in the early morning, when it winds down, then there will be another eating and drinking in the morning. But at the end of this night, we were expecting her soul to be out of purgatory, and she's released into, or accepted into heaven, as the religious saying goes. So this what's going on now is when somebody dies, you don't see the corporate support anymore. You find that people are coming left and right, and the first day of death, they're demanding the family to buy bottles and bottles of rum and food, and actually somebody comes over, the team of people comes over. That's still somewhat free, but sometimes you have to pay for somebody to be cooking. And from the very first days, cooking and drinking and singing, and sometimes you don't even have singing. It's just a matter of playing the music and drinking the rum and talking. And now it's you're playing the stereos and playing religious songs, and but the money is being spent, and the family, there's no sympathy for the family, because nobody's bringing a bunch of banana anymore. No one is bringing 10 pounds of flour or some fish. They're all coming with their empty hands and empty belly. You may not agree with me, but that's what's happening. And by the second day and the third day, when the 10 bottles of rum and wine and whiskey is finished, the members are calling, the people are calling for more, and they're rumbling and they're complaining that, oh, you haven't bought any, and they're so mean and not even buying any rum and thing. There's no rum in the yard. And they're calling it 9 night. Maybe it's 9 nights of celebration, and 9 nights of drinking and merriment and spending. And this goes on until the Saturday or the day before for the funeral. And then the day before the funeral, that's the big spending, man. And because everybody, food is being bought and drinks and everything is stacked up in preparation for the funeral the next day. And after the funeral, and during the funeral is sometimes in the Caribbean still, we have the wonderful singing of the whole gospel songs or the whole church songs. And they sing and pray, and we bury the person. And then after the funeral, then we have the big meal. And the meal is, you may have killed a goat or a cow or a goat, some chickens, a pig, and all that is cooked up, whether curry or a stew, and the rice, or plain rice, and all that is there to be eaten. And then after the funeral, you have everybody come over to the graveyard, and they're hungry, and they're eating and drinking until some of them get drunk. And the family's pockets, a few dollars, is dwindling down. And then you have the parent, some of the kids are crying because they have missed their loved one. The loved one is gone. And they're crying because they have overspent. They have missed their family. They are crying also because they have missed their loved one. Loved one is now in the grave. And they're hoping that the loved one was a Christian, that God would take this person's spirit into heaven. And that's a comforting part of the whole deal. Out of all this, that's one of the most comforting part. That God will take the spirit of our loved one into heaven, and they will be accepted into heaven to live with Christ. But the pockets were burdened. The bank accounts were drained. The one old cow was killed. The one goat or the two goats, one of the two goats were killed, and one is round the back, maybe waiting. But by the end of the funeral, be careful, because a lot of times that goat disappears. And some of the clothes of the person that has died. And if the person was a technical person or a farmer or a shoemaker or something like that, or a seamstress, if you're not careful, the tools, the scissors, and the sewing machine, and your shovel and pick, and your knives are all disappearing one by one. The pots of the house, they are moving out. They now have legs. Because some people are saying, okay, let me borrow this pot with some of the curry goat or some of the stewed beef and rice and peas for my family. But that pot is not coming back. But some of the people are holding on to your grandfather's or your father's or mother's tools and say, oh, she had promised to give it to me. And by the time the end of the day or the end of the week, you look around and you're saying, where is that 3-foot touchy pot? You can't find it. But because it was borrowed. It was borrowed. To put it the safe way, it was borrowed. And it got legs, and it's now in the kitchen of somebody that you knew or who knew your loved one, but you don't know where that is now. The walking stick is gone. The umbrella is gone because they borrowed it. Everything is being borrowed or distributed. It's like you're picking up some of the old African customs where somebody dies and something, I think, is buried in the customs of the Caribbean, where we have the Afrocentric culture, where I think you're supposed to be the dead, the personal effects of the dead is supposed to be distributed and given away, loaned. And I think in the back of our mind that thing still exists, but we don't realize that's what we are using to lose our items from the homes. But in the case of Miss Aunt Dorcas, she didn't have much. I think she had one chair and a table, or 2 chairs, a table in the house. Maybe a lamp that says, with a shade that says home sweet home. Don't remember. Some plates and some fork and knives or utensils, and maybe a whole jug, a water jug, whole jar, ceramic. Well, it's a clay jar. Maybe she had one of those. So there was very few things to lose in her case. But that's death in the old days. Death and burial in the old days. And in the new days now, you have to be mindful of the spending that you do. Because even between the tears and the laughter and the hugs and the sadness, you're being drained of your funds and household items. And I think very few people care. Very few people care because they have gotten an item from your loved ones. They have gotten a pot that they were looking at for all these months or years. They have gotten a blouse, or they've gotten a pants or a belt or shoes that they were looking at, and they said, oh, they had promised it to me. And at the end of the thing, when the food is the day when they have that big meal, don't believe that if you have drinks or rum left over, it's gonna stay in the family. It's gonna get bagged, and then legs are attached to those items, and they're gonna walk. Because you're being stripped of all the items in the household as much as possible. So some people guard against that. You don't have the what they call the 9-night these days at the home, or a setup at the home. You don't have the repast at your house because there's a liability that you're going to lose your household items and your personal things, or the things that belong to the one that is now dead. And if you treasure any of those things, you keep the repast away from the house. Keep it as far as possible. And some people don't even want to do that. Some people don't even want to do that. They get a contractor to cook some food, and they bring the food to the grave site. And after the funeral and all that, they distribute these not recycling dispensable dishes or styrofoam food plates with full of food to each person with a drink and maybe a slice of cake. And the repast takes place away from the home. So I'm comparing death in the olden days. And I remind you that I'm going to reinforce that setup is the night before the funeral in the olden days. And then 9 nights, I think it's 9 nights after the funeral. So whatever is happening these days and thing, and it's maybe it's in an effort to really strip the family of their wealth, because it doesn't match the olden days or the tradition that we normally use in the old days. So, Shippy the Explorer, this has been, it's somewhat morbid, but the olden days were golden days when you had support. And I'm showing it and talked about death, which is inevitable, but I'm just bringing some of the whole story of what it was back in those days, and how, as much as we were crying and losing and feeling sad, there was an element of community support for the family. And you feel good that people came around and support you in the deepest and the midst of sorrow. But after it's finished, you know that you had the support to bury your loved one and got them, and sing and pray and got them prepared for heaven as much as possible. So, don't blame me, but that's how it was. And I wish that we go back to some of those olden times the method of doing things, because they were, I think, interesting, supportive, and less expensive. Because I don't even touch on the board. Sometimes the cedar board would come from a stash of stock of board that some member of the community had, and they would donate it to the family, and that was used to build a coffin. So anyway, this is Shippy the Explorer talking about death in the family in the olden days. Story time. Next time we come with a less morbid story where I bring you some of the olden days of life in the Caribbean. Like, share, and subscribe. Don't be afraid of them. Like, share, and subscribe. Talk to you as soon as possible. Walk good.